we tell our sellers it would be ludicrous to work with a buyer who didn't have an agent working for them. Who's going to advocate for them? Who's going to do all that stuff? I mean, the buyer's realtor gets paid because they're working. There are things that have to happen on behalf of the buyer that somebody's got to do.
Hi, welcome to the Mortgages Made Easy podcast. We are blessed to have Maria Rini back with us. Maria is a great realtor in Bergen County. We will post her information below and at the end of the podcast. But Maria has been in this job for what, about 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks?
30 years.
30 years.
30 years.
She's really very knowledgeable about the real estate landscape in New Jersey. She's really somebody who goes out and communicates strongly with her clients about what's going on in the market. And I thought this would be a great starting point, talking about the recent legal changes that people are all abuzz about, namely, due to a lawsuit, the National Association of Realtors has changed the model that people have been working on for 50 or more years. So when you walk into a meeting, let's say with a seller, let's start with that. Traditionally, you would go in and you'd say, you're going to pay 6% or whatever the number is, and that will cover your role as the listing agent, the person who's trying to sell the home, as well as whoever ends up representing the buyer. And that was a traditional model.
Yes.
And now the model seems to be that the seller takes care of you, the buyer takes care of his or her realtor, and there's some stuff in the middle that remains to be seen. Tell me a little bit about the communications, the conversations you've had so far with your sellers.
Yeah.
Start with the sellers.
So that, truth be told, sellers always had the ability to act in whatever way they chose. It just wasn't something that was discussed as much or as clearly as it is being discussed these days. And now it must be addressed. We've been, the short answer is we're seeing business as usual. And the reason for that is the buyers, as you know, Dave, have in effect been paying both agents compensation this whole time. It's been financed in their mortgage. So the seller, the seller's agent has always negotiated with the seller. This is the compensation that you'll pay to both agents or both agencies involved in the deal. And the buyer will finance that in their mortgage when they buy the house. The same way every seller has, up until about now, has taken advantage of that same system when they bought the house. The reality is the buyer has amassed a down payment, smaller or larger. You know, you're the mortgage master. You know how the variety of loans and down payments that they can work with, but they've amassed a down payment. They're going to pay to move. They're going to need reserves. They're going to have closing costs. And now they're being asked to compensate their agent directly, or some people are asking them to compensate their agent directly. And it's just not really a workable model. In our opinion, sellers are getting record numbers for their houses because the buyer's agents are bringing the buyers there. If you're not offering compensation, what incentive do they have to come? My personal take on it, if I'm representing a buyer, whether or not that compensation is being offered by the seller, I'm going to show them the house and I'm going to try and negotiate that into the offer. However, we have to make that work. And again, that's your area of expertise, and you've got lots of ways to help a buyer finance their buyer's agent's compensation.
I love
Um,
what you said, though, because I think you hit it on the head. The only money in the table on a real estate transaction is the money that the buyer brings to the table.
yeah,
The seller doesn't walk in there, okay, Maria, here's an extra $50,000 that we'll leave on the table just in case. Never happens, right? The only money at the table on a real estate transaction is the money that the buyer brings. And the question is, how are we going to split it up? You know,
that's it.
how much is the buyer going to retain? How much is the seller going to retain? How much is the listing agent going to retain? If the buyer is represented by a realtor, how much is that person getting paid? And then it's just like a game of Monopoly. You're trading off points and positions to get to the final result.
Good analogy, but yeah. Now, what's interesting to me, when I'm counseling, when I'm speaking with the buyer, some of them are in a panic. Like, what if they're not going to pay your fee? I can't afford to pay you. And the answer is, that's okay. You don't need to buy the house then. Like, nobody's going to, hold your fingers to the fire and say, you have to you buy this house, even if the seller absolutely refuses to pay compensation. What
Well,
we've seen
but it's
happen,
more complicated than that, really. Okay. So what's your typical house price?
I think we're averaging somewhere around 700 right now.
$700,000.
Yeah.
And what's your typical down payment?
In that range, I mean, anywhere from 10 to 20%.
10 to 20%. So so let's start with somebody who's putting down 10%. And let's say the seller says, no way, no how am I going to pay for the buyer's agent. No way, no how am I going to pay for the buyer's agent. Well, if that happens, no problem. I was going to pay you $700,000. I'm going to pay you $680,000. I'm going to pay my realtor $20,000. And I'm going to take a 8% mortgage instead of a 10% mortgage, or a 7% mortgage instead of a 10% mortgage. The numbers end up being almost exactly the same, right? Because no matter what you do, the buyer's bringing all the money to the table. And if the buyer has $100,000 to bring to the table, that's not going to expand because the seller says, I'm not going to pay the buyer's agent. So now the question has always been, when you walk in, let's say you're walking in doing a listing presentation, the question in the mind of the seller has always been, do I even need Maria in this transaction? Right? I could sell it myself. And our response is usually, you don't care how much I make. You shouldn't care if I make $1 million. If you make $1 more with me here than without me here, you should be a very happy person.
Right. And that is one of the phenomenon of this market, with this very highly competitive market, is more people are working with agents, both buyers and sellers, than at any other time in history. The percentage of transactions that are happening with an agent are at an all-time high. It's because it's so competitive. It's because it's so complex that they need guidance. And as always, it's the seller's agent can bring more marketing muscle to the house that's going to result in more showings and a higher price for it. It's
Mhm.
just It's just, that's the reality of the market. It's everything supply and demand. We can create that demand to get them the highest price for the house. And I think most people realize that. In our case, I'm not working, our company, our team policy is we're not working with any sellers who aren't offering buyer's compensation. Like I said, like you just illustrated, the buyer has the ability to work with that same down payment, offer a lower payment on the house, pay the buyer directly. When you're writing up an offer, if you ask the seller to offer that compensation, well, a smart seller's agent will say to the seller, well, I know you didn't want to offer compensation, but this is what it nets out to. So here's how much they're paying you. And sometimes that's still the best offer, right? And so we firmly believe there are agents out there who will call, and one of the other parts of that law is we cannot advertise the compensation as a listing agent. You can't advertise the compensation you're offering to a buyer's agent through an MLS system anymore, anywhere in the country. So and we haven't found an elegant workaround to communicate that as yet. So it's, I mean, best way is texting or email, so you have a written trail to it when the agent responds. But we're still getting, so you've got to make that phone call, that extra attempt at communication with the agent. Is your seller offering compensation, and how much is it? There are buyers out there whose agents are not being clear with them and saying, hey, listen, even if the seller's not offering, you can make an offer on that house. We'll try and negotiate that in one way or another. But there are some agents who aren't communicating that to their clients, and the client's going, don't show me anything unless the seller's paying the compensation. And so I think the end result of the one thing is this law, which was, the intent was to make it more transparent for the client. I think that part has backfired. The buyers are more confused than ever. And to be an informed, ready to buy, calm buyer in this market, you need to have the conversation with your loan officer and with your agent so that you fully understand how you're going to make an offer depending on the situation with the seller.
Yeah, I love it because it's the law of unintended consequences with a vengeance. With a vengeance, right? Because you think you're going to make it easy, and then, boy, something else entirely happens. So
Yeah.
You're having conversations with your sellers. And, I love to hear the fact that most of them, look, at the end of the day, you're the expert. And so they'd be silly not to listen to you when you say, I think you're better off with with the putting down the money. They'd be silly not to listen to you because at the end of the day, they're trusting you with their largest asset.
Yeah. And so they may hear different stories. It's always been like that, David. I'm giving you, my best advice. You need to offer that compensation to the buyer's agent because you want to attract as many, or you don't have to accept an offer for anybody, but you want to get as many offers through the door, as many buyers through the door, so you get as many offers as possible. It's only going to benefit you.
And you build excitement, and building excitement means that there may be a bidding war, and now you're really benefiting.
Yeah, and we're seeing that time and time and time again. We are still seeing multiple offers. We're still seeing bidding wars on everything we put on the market. And that's what you want for your client's choice. Yeah.
Now,
go ahead.
So your sellers seem to be under control, and that's what I expected. What about the buyers? are you running into buyers who say, why do I need a realtor? Or how am I going to pay for this? Or what's the dynamic there?
Yeah, I think there are more people out there not asking the questions. Maybe it's human nature that you don't want to be thought of as uninformed or, not being fully aware of what's actually going on. We see, we have seen a lot of people flooding to open houses because at an open house here, you don't need to have a buyer agency agreement with anybody. If you're not working with an agent yet, you can walk into an open house. We've got this, I don't have a copy of it here, but we've got a
The disclosure.
statement, yeah, disclosure that they've got to look at. And what has always been in an open house, most of the people coming through the door are just not ready, willing, and able buyers. They haven't been pre-approved yet. They don't know what financing looks or feels like, what a monthly payment looks like. They're kind of coming in blind. And most of them will become buyers, 3 months down the road. But when they're first, we're seeing that same thing happening now. People are coming off the sidelines and walking into an open house because they just don't know who to trust or how this is supposed to work. How to find somebody who can explain to them what needs to happen if they're going to buy a home. So
So
that
let's
that's
talk.
the sad part.
Yeah, well, when I've been at open houses, what I find sad is how many realtors have not explained it to their clients. So the buyer will walk into the open house and they'll say, yes, I'm represented by a realtor. Great. Have you signed the realtor agency agreement? No. Well, that means they're not represented by a realtor. And now
Yeah.
it becomes a little bit of a catch-22. Tell me about conversations you've had with buyers. Let's say a buyer comes up to you and says, I would like you to represent me, but I'm not sure I want to pay you. Tell me about that. Or I don't even
Yeah.
know if I need a realtor. Maria, I'm looking to buy a house in Bergen County tomorrow. I don't even know if I need a realtor. Why do I need a realtor?
Yeah. I don't mean to sound scary, but you can't minimalize the complexity of a real estate transaction. And I do think you need somebody advocating for you. That's first and foremost. Somebody's got to guide you. Most people do 1, 2, 3 real estate transactions in their entire lifetime. We do them day in, day out for years, right? So I think you need to have somebody you can trust when they tell you a thing, you know that it's true. And how do you navigate the thing? If you said, hey, I'm going to buy a house today, do I even need a realtor? Well, the first question is, are you pre-approved? Well, why would I need a pre-approval? I haven't found a house yet. Well, do you know what a mortgage payment looks like? What kind of an interest rate you'll even be given by a bank? How credit worthy are you? What kind of savings do you need? Reserves do you need? Et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is really your bailiwick, but just starting there and being able to put somebody in a trusted lender's hands to work through even that part of the process.
And
That's the
then
first
there's the
step.
inspection and what happens if something goes wrong with the inspection.
And when people throw out terms like, should we waive the appraisal, or what happens if the house doesn't appraise, or what happens if what is title work? What does clean title mean? It's a whole nother language that needs to be explained. It's a complex process with lots and lots of people involved. And I think you need somebody to help you navigate all that. If you weren't working with somebody, I don't know how you would get the ball from, all the way down the field to the finish line. How do you navigate all that stuff? Uh, I don't know how that would happen, but you're certainly not going to do it alone.
And you're not going
Or
to end off better off than you would if you had professional representation.
no,
Like, you're not going to go to in North Jersey, where you and I are doing business. In North Jersey, you're not going to say, I don't need an attorney, I'll just handle it myself. Right?
no, because
You're
the
going to
other
have an
guy's got
attorney.
one.
Huh? Because the other guy's got
Even,
one.
even if you wanted to, the other guy's got one and he's going to outmaneuver you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the seller has a realtor, and therefore you'd be silly as a layperson going up against a professional, especially a expert like yourself. And I think that, that's what I think what's going to happen is that people like you who've been doing it for, what'd you say, 3 weeks now?
30 years.
Oh, 30 years, sorry. People who've been doing it for 30 years, who really know their way around. If you come up against somebody like that, if they're in an adversary position to you, which they are, if their interests are accrued to the seller, then you are at a disadvantage. And what is that worth, especially at the last minute, if there's a problem, if there's an inspection issue, if there's a delay, blah, blah, blah. You need to have the people on your side who know how to navigate it and who have the teams to help you.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. But in our case, in the case of we tell our sellers, it would be ludicrous to work with a buyer who didn't have an agent working for them. Who's going to advocate for them? Who's going to do all that stuff? I mean, the buyer's realtor gets paid because they're working. There are things that have to happen on behalf of the buyer that somebody's got to do. So yeah, I don't think there's a workaround for it.
Let's move to the next topic of current interest, and that is, as you well know, maybe 2 months ago, we're today's September 30th when we're recording this, but a couple of months ago, the rates were in the mid 7s. Now we're seeing rates in the low 6s. How are you communicating that not only to your sellers and buyers, but the people who are on the sidelines thinking about whether they should buy or sell?
Yeah. David, my feelings have not changed. My speech has not changed much over, even when rates were higher than that. The rates have been predicted to come down. They are continue to move in the right direction. Are we ever going to see, sub 3% rates again? I don't know if we'll see them in my lifetime, but they've certainly gotten more aggressive. The housing prices have continued to go up. Rentals they've gone up 30% in the last 4 years. That's crazy. Everything's crazy, but get into a house as fast as you can at any rate and refi when you can. That's it. The housing prices they're not predicted to fall. We've got almost 70% of the US, as you know, who own 50% or better in equity in their homes. There's no crash coming here. And we've got the largest buying population in US history. The millennials are 45.5 million. They're not going away. They're 1.5 times the size of the boomers. We've got a housing crisis, and you need to buy a house and then refinance later. Suck it up. Eat, noodles and ketchup. I don't know, but you need to get in whatever you can, even if it's a more modest home. Or this is one of the things that makes me nuts. I see these buyers and they want the completely done house, and we want to find our forever home. They go from 0 to 60 instead of saying, okay, maybe we can't afford it, but let's get the condo and build some equity and trade that off, or keep it as an investment property down
Mhm.
the road. Or we want to be in this community, we'll get the modest house in this community, we'll put our roots down here, and then we'll move to the bigger house when our salaries grow as time goes on, and we can better afford it. But waiting is not helping anybody get in a house. It hasn't. I mean, things have been, on a trajectory like this for 5 years. It's not going to get better anytime soon. It may
Yeah,
level off a little, but
yeah.
prices are not on your side.
I don't know anyone who's printing land anymore. Bergen County is not getting bigger. And whatever the town is, no one's going to pop an extra 1,000 homes in any town in Bergen County. So, we're in a market where, as you said, a lot of buyers, a lot of people want to live in northern New Jersey, in Westchester, in Nassau County, etc. And wherever you are, no one's creating new land. So if there's a house there, that's the house that's there. And maybe someone will renovate it or do something. But in our market globally, the northern New York, northern New Jersey, New York, Connecticut market, there's not a whole lot of construction like you see out west, where people are just building 1,000 row houses at a time.
Yeah. And it never, it's land's always been scarce. We're the most densely populated part of the country.
Yeah.
That's not going to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so great. Maria, thank you so much for taking the time, and thanks for sharing your wisdom. And this has been the Mortgages Made Easy podcast. We're going to share Maria's information, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dave.